Bill Flynn, how you doing?
Doing great, Cameron. How are you?
I'm good. So just before we got logged on, I had a dog barking in the background, and you started to tell me about how you taught your dogs how to speak. Tell me more about that. How'd you teach them? What'd you teach them to say?
Yeah, so we had barking dogs as well, and the way we learned to get them to not bark was to teach them how to bark. Right? So we taught them how to bark on command and rewarded them for that, which
Okay.
then basically had them not bark unless they were rewarded for it.
Wow. What kind of dogs were they?
First one was Newfie. Next one was a Greyhound, which was a rescue,
Solid.
and the third one, I can't remember the name of it. It's sort of a medium to small dog. It's like from, I want to say like Austria or something like that. It has an unusual name and now I can't remember what it is.
Was it a shepherd style dog?
No, more like a closer to a terrier.
Oh, all right. So yappy for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But his name was Cinco and he was a
Okay.
rescue from Puerto Rico. And we actually rescued him from what was then my sister-in-law who couldn't keep a dog.
Oh,
So
okay. That makes sense.
basically, we basically took him in.
How very nice of you.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
it was really her sister who did all the work. I can't take any credit.
Yeah, we've got a German Shepherd that is just under a year old, and like I was saying, she's just now entering her protection stage. So she just figured out that she needs to bark at everything that comes near us, and it's really cute at the dog park when she like puts herself between us and the other dogs, or goes between our legs and gets in position, which we didn't teach her how to do that. That was instinctual.
Yeah, I imagine.
But it's pretty awful when the pool guy shows up because she just goes and goes and goes for the entire time he's here.
Nice.
I'm gonna have to figure out how to teach her to bark, and perhaps some of your leadership frameworks can help me out with that. I know
Yes, yes, they're for all sorts of mammals.
terrible segue, right? I was actually interested when I was reading about you in the C decision framework. I am a
Yeah.
framework guy. I love
Oh,
anything that makes me not have to figure out the emotion and intuition behind things. So anything that's like a one, two, three step, that's my shit. I'm all about that. So can you describe the 5C decision framework and how that's used?
yeah, so I work with leaders as you segued into, and I work with leadership teams. I work with the CEO or the head of company, whatever you want to call it, and his or her leadership team. And it's my belief that your job, if you want to grow your business, your job is to affect change. Because to grow your business, it's all about change, right? If you stay the same, then you're not probably going to grow. And you do that through decisions. And when I ask them, how do you make decisions? I get sort of varied answers, which basically, we just sort of sit around and talk about it and make a decision. And I think, well, that's not really making a decision. So my advice is always your job is to make the fewest decisions as a leadership team, as a leader in a leadership team. And your job is to teach others how to make decisions that, sort of you would make or that should be made in support of the growth of the company itself. And I don't really care what framework you use, just right? And
Yeah.
use it the same way all the time, right? And what I do is I tell a story. For those of you who know, I'm old. I'm over 60 years old, so I have some memories of this. But John F. Kennedy, the president at the time in the 60s, had this problem. And the first time that he made a decision, he made it badly, and it was called the Bay of Pigs, and it was a
Oh,
disaster. Right? And it was a
okay.
disaster. And he broke basically all the rules. Right? They didn't check what people said. They just believed that it was true. He was in meetings where he would affect things just through his body language. Um, they would then sort of talk through stuff and then change things, but not go back and have it see what ripple effects those changes had. So it is a quintessential disaster. And most people talk about it as a horrible, um, for many reasons. It didn't work out well. But to his credit, he said, "Look, I don't want to ever do that again." And so he came up with a different decision process. And just weeks later, maybe a few months later, he had to have another big decision, which was called the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Uh,
And he went from that other process where it was just sort of a free for all and no sort of rigor or process to it, to a much more rigorous process where he said, all right, let's figure out all the things that we could do. And they said, it's sort of a brainstorming model. And then they basically said, we have lots of things we could do, but it's two things that we think are the best possible opportunities, which is basically, do we invade, or do we blockade? And he said, great. All of those who want to, sort of do the invade thing, let's get you together. I want you to go think about it and come back with the plan. Those of you who want to blockade, same thing. And let's present that. And while they
huh.
were doing all that, he kept himself out of the process, because he knew that if he just sort of nodded his head or anything, he was going to signal his either pleasure or displeasure to the thing, and it would affect their thinking. And he didn't want to do that. The other thing he did, which was really smart, is, and I think it's called the red team, he kept Bobby, his brother, and two other people that he trusted out of the entire process. And they were not invited in until the end. And their job was to poke holes in things without any bias, to the process.
That sounds
So
like
then he
the
hadn't.
perfect job.
Yeah, right. Especially if you love that kind of stuff. What he also did is he said, great. So they presented their stuff and they debated it, and he said, great. Now switch teams. Now I want you who are on the blockade to do the invade, etc. And then they had to present again as if that was their plan. So he
Well,
started to let everyone see perspective both sides, right? So they were a little more open minded when they finally came down to it. There were a whole bunch of other things that he did, but he had a process, right? He said, we're going to do this, and he walked them through the process. And at the end, Bobby came in, and the other two, and they poked holes in it, and they made it better because they weren't emotionally tied to anything at that point. So that's one process. I know at least three other processes to do decision making. So I say, look, I don't really care which one you do, and you can make up your own, but it needs to work for you, and you should track it and make sure it does, and then just follow it for everything. Now, if you want to move the trash can from one side of the room to the other, or completely go into a new business, it's the same exact process. One probably takes 5 minutes, and one may take 5 months, but you have to have a process. So I've been studying decision making for years, um, and I can tell you that story as well as to why. But to get to your 5C thing is, I was finding that my leaders weren't like finding one, right? I even gave them. I said, here's one that I like. I said, you don't have to choose it, but here's the book that teaches you how to do it, and no one was doing it. So I decided to incorporate it into my work with them. So then we would walk through decisions. I would have them use the process and walk through decisions, and then have them sort of say, hey, do we like this? Do we not like this? Is it working for us? Is it not, etc. And those 5 C's are, first, context. I'll sort of do them first. So it's context, clarity, create choices, choose, and then commit. And the first one is arguably the most important, is that most people confuse deciding with choosing. And choosing is A or B. And often it's not A or B, it's A, do we do it or not?
yeah.
Right. And that's the decision we're making. And so I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow on this, and I've done a couple others. Like, I don't like talking to people. I like interacting, sort of like you do, right? And so I make it very interactive. So at the end of my keynote, or what do you want to call it, I have someone volunteer and say, here's a decision that I'm working through, and then we do it together live. Right. I've never heard the thing before, and I just sort of wing it. My last one it was actually a woman who was intimately involved in the conference itself, who came to my presentation, and she said, I have a decision we're trying to make. We're trying to figure out where we want to hold this conference next year. And I said, okay. And I asked the group, now that I'd already taught them everything, and I said, so what did you hear from her? And a few people who were savvy said, she's choosing, right? She's doing, do we do the conference? Where do we do the conference? Right? We're making a choice that's what we're trying to do. It's trying to figure out what it is. So it's sort of, there might be lots of options, but it's really one choice.
Right.
And I said, well, here's how I would back up and say, how do we get context for that? And I said, well, what is the purpose of the conference? And what do you want the attendees to get out of it? And what would you like to get out of it? And, she was kind of stumbling, and I said, all right, so let me give you my version of this. It says, if I were running a conference, here's what I would want. I would want everyone to be so delighted with the conference that they told lots of other people. So we have lots more attendees as they come because now they're sort of selling for you. And then I would also want to make sure that next year we're making even more money, right? So that's sort of a benefit for them and a benefit for us, right? And it's mutual benefit. And I said, so what I would want to do is what kind of conference could we create that would have those two outcomes be as possible as they could? And one of those options would be where do we have it? And I said, but if you figured out what you wanted to do, how you want to do it, the option of where to hold it might become self-evident because you couldn't hold that thing in the hotel that we're in right now. It doesn't fit it well or
Uh,
whatever, right? I said,
right.
so that's what decision making, sort of setting up context for decision making is really stepping back and say, who are the stakeholders here? What are we trying to accomplish for them? How would we describe an ideal outcome of this thing that we're trying to decide? And that just because you're doing that, and I'll say the trick of what I'm doing isn't really all this little stuff I'm saying is just slowing your brain down is really the trick, right? Because your brain just wants to make decisions really fast and get going, right? It doesn't want to spend a lot of time and energy, figuring stuff out and working hard. It's very lazy. And so this is basically everything I'm doing is really, and all the other frameworks that you would do decision making is really just slowing your brain down. And this is one of the ways to do it. But when you do context, you're also looking to try to create different different way of thinking, right? You want to be more creative and innovative as opposed to this was up in Nashua, New Hampshire, right? So do we want to do it in Manchester, New Hampshire or Nashua or, that's very different than what kind of conference are we trying to do and what are we trying to accomplish? So setting the context is really, really important because then it's a lot easier to do sort of the next thing, which I kind of did clarity in there as well, right? But clarity is what are we trying to accomplish with the stakeholders, et cetera. So I sort of combine context and clarity together. But it's really saying,
Right.
okay, now that we understand all that, all right, now what are we trying to do, right? What exactly? How much money do we want to make? With clarity, right? How many people do we want to have attend? What is the score? When we ask them to score the conference, what is the ideal score that we would like them to get? So that would be clarity, right?
Huh.
And that helps to measure how do we do very well. Then you create choices, right? It's like, okay, based upon everything we decided we wanted to do, where could we hold this? And it's a New England conference, so they could hold it anywhere in New England they want. Um, and then it's okay. Now you choose, right? And you sort of work out how do you choose things. There's lots of ways to decide to choose. I'm a fan of. I do this thing called the $100 game with my clients, which is just a lot of fun. It's just it's sort of it's funny money. You get to spend $100. And let's say you have 4 or 5 choices. You can spend it on any one or one, whatever you want to do. I do make a rule that says you have to spend at least $10, and I ask for whole numbers because it's a lot easier. And then you go up, you sort of figure out everything you want to do, and then so all the 5 choices are available on the wall or whatever. And then when everyone's ready to vote, then they do it because I don't want people to go up and choose before other people have decided because they will affect someone else's
Oh, yeah.
decision, right? Either implicitly or explicitly. We don't understand how much we take in terms of data, and a lot of it's out of our unconscious awareness. So I say we wait, and then they go up and they do it, and everybody loves this game. And then we see where the money was spent, and it's interesting. I've done votes and I've done other things. When you spend money, even though it's not real, it's
Mhm.
different. It's like I don't want to waste money, even though it's
Right.
not even real. It has a different effect on our brain. So we do that, and we say, okay, where was most of the money spent? And then if it's close, I'll say, let's argue, right? So if you guys are close, who wants to argue that the second choice really should be the first choice? So then, you sort of foment some sort of
Ooh.
discord so we can make sure we go through that. And then I say, so does anyone, do we want to change this or are we going with this one? And then we finally decide. And then we commit. And committing is, okay, who owns this? And someone has to own it. And I like volunteers. I don't like voluntolds. Then we say, okay, when do we have to have this thing done, right? When is this thing ready? Whatever that is. Let's say there's a plan that needs to be written on how we're going to then run the conference. That's the outcome of the thing. And then what are our measurements for success? And then I say, okay, and then let's set a date for when we're going to reconvene and say, how did we do? Right? Because the decision isn't done until you've really understood how good it was. So then you reconvene, and I like this thing called an AAR, which is a military term called after action review. It's just 4 questions, but you can do it any way you want, but you want it to be an effective way to do it. And then I also say, look, if you really want to buy into this whole decision thing, you should have a journal, and all of your big decisions should be in the journal. So when you are looking at having another decision, you can review the journal. You can say, oh, this decision sounds a lot like the one we did 2 years ago. How do we do that? What did we do? And you sort of have some history to help you. So you're not sort of reinventing the wheel on a regular basis. So to me, that's the
Interesting.
entire process around decision making, which I will tell you, Cameron, I would bet 10% of your audience or less does that.
You're correct. I've been actually, let me circle back on one of the things you mentioned. You said that when you had these people pick and vote with their money, and then you would make them advocate for the second choice over the first.
Yeah.
There's a framework that my wife and I use, which is, do you immediately regret your decision? And what that is when we're trying to decide between two things, almost always when you make the decision, you are either going to just be like, yes, cool, let's go, or you're going to have an immediate pang, just something in your heart or your gut that goes, oh, should have done the other one. And if you feel that, just go ahead and do the other one. Because obviously there was some pull there. And whatever thinking you were doing, whatever like playing around with the ideas you were doing that led you to pick the one over the other, it doesn't matter anymore because you had such a gut reaction, such a visceral reaction that you have to go ahead and just do the second choice. So when you have your leaders vote and they actually are advocating for the second choice, are you moving them towards potentially deciding that they should have picked the second choice?
No, so I try to be Switzerland, right? And which is hard because I'm a human being too. But I also try to. I'm sitting there saying, look, I don't know their business. I don't know the parameters around. I don't know. So my opinion really doesn't matter. And it's probably not a good one because it's not very well informed. There's one thing that I didn't say, which kind of affects what you're saying, Cameron, is that one thing I also say is first, let's decide, is this a reversible or an irreversible decision?
Oh, good question.
So that sort of gets to what I would say if you decided this was irreversible, and irreversible is a term of art, right? It's going to be really expensive or really long to fix versus just, it's black or white.
Right.
And I would say to you, if it's an irreversible decision and you have this gut thing, don't just go with the other one. You know, go back and revisit and maybe invite other people into the process just to get different perspectives. Because what happens is there's something called the endowment effect,
Uh-huh.
which is sort of a neuroscience thing, which says that we value when we own something and we own a decision, we've now value it immediately more than we did before we owned it.
Uh,
So, and they've done plenty of sort of tests on this. They've done things where they give away art or mugs or whatever, right? And
right.
they would say to someone, "Hey, here's a mug, and whatever." And they say they don't own it, and they say, "Well, how much would you pay for this mug?" And they say, "$2.50." And then they give them the mug, and then they ask them later, "How much would you sell this for?" And it's like
Right.
$5. Same mug, same person, $5. All of a sudden now it's twice as valuable, right? Because they own it, right? And that's a natural human affliction, basically, right? That most
Right.
people don't understand. And that's what's involved in a lot of decision making. That's why you're slowing your brain down because, again, our brain likes to just make really quick decisions. It doesn't like to work hard. It's only 3 pounds of our body, but it owns 20% of our energy. And it's really good at making shortcuts, right? And that's why we are able to do what we do as human beings. And a shortcut is, oh, just go with your gut. And your gut is just your brain looking at your history and saying, oh, I recognize this situation. Let's just do the thing we did before. Whether it was good for us or not, it doesn't care, right?
Uh-huh.
It's just let's make it easy. And that's why, this is why if you're into therapy and stuff, there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive
Right.
behavioral therapy is basically changing that, right? Is going back into that situation and making a different decision. If you do that enough times, you're now training your brain to then default to the good thing for you as opposed to the bad thing for you.
Interesting. That kind
Yeah.
of makes me think of, so I heard recently about a study where they were measuring happiness post decision,
Hmm.
right? So after you make the decision, are you happy with the decision? And they did students in a college where they could only put one piece of art above their bed in their dorm.
Hmm.
Half the group only got to pick once at the very beginning of the semester and never again. The other half
Yep.
could replace it whenever they wanted. And it turns out that the folks who picked once at the beginning, even if they were unhappy with the one they picked immediately, at the end of the semester were way more happy with their choice than the people who got to try out a bunch of stuff over time. So that
Yep.
gut
I know that
feeling
too.
of I need to change the picture really didn't affect happiness or ostensibly any other actual like usage benefit of the poster.
Yep. Again, it's back to the it's somewhat to do with the endowment effect. We just we value something, and then because we don't have any other option, there's no opportunity for regret, right? It's not because there's no other choice. So you just become more enamored of the thing that you have. That's why I say
Hmm.
that's why there's this social psychologist. His name is, I think it's Dan Gilbert, and they've studied people happiness and longevity in marriage, and they said that it's actually better to get married than to just stay together, because those who get married, back to sort of the same thing, is you made your choice, right? And that's the only piece of art on the wall. If you don't stay married, I could, this one doesn't work out, I could go do something else, right? So you have this sort of
Yes.
psychological out. But if you're married, you're like, you're committed, you're in, and then if you see something else that might be better, you're like, no, I committed to this. And so it's a
Oh
feeling.
boy. I wonder what he feels about this sort of new wave of folks who are getting married under contract for 5 years and you can renegotiate at the end. Do we call it quits? Do we keep going? There was some study that said that those kinds of folks are more happy because they have to recommit each and every time. So you get periods of extreme joy right after you make the decision. And then as that joy fails, you come up on your next renewal contract and you're like, you know what? And it made me think about like renting apartments back in the day where I would, every time I'm in an apartment and my lease is about to come up, I would spend hours searching at other apartments around. And then I would eventually just resign. And then I'll be like, ah, I forgot that this apartment is cool for this reason. I forgot that this apartment is cool for that reason.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, so I'd love to see the data on that when the study comes out, because I guess technically more people would break up than
Yeah.
would stay together. Like if they did two groups where they didn't have that option and those that did, and sort of watch them over 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Well, that's almost exactly the painting over your bed, right? When you have the
Yeah,
option to swap it out, you're probably going to, at least once out of the innumerable number of cycles where you get to swap it out, you're going to choose to swap it out, right?
right. Especially, if someone comes up who just seems a lot better than whatever situation you're in that point in time, right? And
Yeah.
you don't know how your head is at that point, right? There's so many factors in that process that you may do that, and then 10 years later you may be like, oh, that was a terrible idea, and the other one was actually better. But at that point you're done. So
Right.
that'd be interesting. I'd love to see how that comes out, and see how it either supports or refutes the current thinking.
That would be interesting too. And I assume it's so you got to imagine they're boiling into those contracts like the prenup and the divorce and all that other stuff too. So when the swapping happens, I'd be curious to see because the other half of marriage is divorce and the potential like alimony or other financial things that you have to deal with at that time. So if the renewal contract bakes in some way to avoid those costs, maybe there's no risk. But if it's not protecting you against those costs, you still have high risk. So every renewal period, it's like, damn, I'm gonna have to put down a whole nother down payment. I'm gonna have to pay for all of the repairs. It's like not getting your deposit back from the old apartment and needing to put down a down payment on the new apartment.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It'd be interesting to see what people decide, right? Anyway,
Yeah,
so that's
I
uh,
like.
so that's sort of that's the decision framework at a high level, right?
Yeah,
Well, I go into a lot more depth when I do the keynote, but happy to talk more about that. Or I'm all about frameworks as well. I've written 6 books in the last 6 months, and they
really.
all have frame. Yeah, they all have
All
frameworks.
in the leadership decision making realm.
Yes, yeah. The first book I started writing was the one we're talking about, which was about decisions. I just
Uh-huh.
decided, and to be honest with you, I'm not a writer. I don't like to write. I'm not very good at it. I find it difficult. But with AI, it's a lot easier because I'm not really doing a lot of the writing. I'm mostly just sort of guiding. Like I have my thoughts and what I want to do, and I know what I sort of want it to be like, and what I wanted to compare it to, because I've read lots of books. I've probably read 1,000 business books over the last 20 or 30 years. And I have my favorites, and my favorites sort of fall into this pattern. And I want my book to be the best of those things. So I started saying, okay, I need to teach my clients a framework. And I sort of combine two things when I talk about decisions. And one is what kind of decision are you making is the first thing you want to decide. And I ask people that, like, what kind of decision you're making? Like, what do you mean? What kind of decision am I making? I said, well, there are actually different kinds of decisions. I'm like, okay. And I said, so though at a high level, there's a simple or clear and obvious decision,
Mhm.
which is, sort of best practice or whatever you want to call that thing. Then there's a complicated decision, which is something you've never really done before, but it's probably been decided by someone at some point. There's a complex decision, which really you're tilling new ground here, right? There's no there's nothing you can say, oh, let's just do it like them, or combine these two or three things and do it like that. You're in a situation where you're dealing with the unknown, and then there's chaos, the chaotic decision, and COVID was chaotic, right? So COVID was something that none of us had really experienced before, unless we were 100 years old,
Right.
uh, and had good memories when we were babies. So all the decisions that were made in almost all decisions made initially in COVID were chaotic. It's like just decide something and see if it works, and then you fix it later. So the interesting thing is most people treat a complex decision like a simple decision, and this is where we get into trouble.
What do you mean?
So when I talk about business, a quintessential complex decision is pricing. How do we price our product?
Right.
How can we figure out how much someone will pay us for this thing? And what's interesting is pricing is there's sort of an upper band, which is what you would like them to pay you, and then there's a lower band, which is what they would like to pay you. And there's some crossover, and you're trying to figure out how to optimize the crossover. You don't want to gouge them and be a horrible partner of or provider for the most part, but you still want to get as much as you possibly can. You want to extract the most value you possibly can. So what do most people do when they price a product? And I'm asking.
You guess, and then
Yeah.
you either leave it because people are biting, or you test by continuous increases, nominal increases until people stop biting. Or if you ever listen to Alex Hormozy or Dan Martell, you just double it and see what happens.
Right. Which, by the way, is that's the better way to do it. I'll tell you, Cameron, most people don't do it that way. What they do is they say,
Correct.
okay, let's see the people that have sell stuff around us. What do they price it at? And then they price their product relative to what they think their value is over the other.
Yeah.
Now, the assumption they're making is that they know what they're doing, the other people. But they just did the same thing when they came out. And then they did it before that, and they did it before that. So they're treating it like a simple decision, right? It's just, oh, I'll
Mhm.
just look at what someone else does and I'll price it relative to that. If I think I'm 10% better, then if they're a buck, I'm a buck 10
Yeah.
or whatever. That is not how you do it. How you do it is the way you said it, which is there's no way you can guess what your particular constituency that you want to send this to will pay. So you have to experiment, right? You have to do safe to fail experiments. Amazon is amazingly good at this now because they change the prices automatically, right?
Mhm.
Based on the demand. And as the demand goes up, guess what? The price goes up. And then till such point that the demand either slows or stops, and then they put the price there. If the demand starts to drop down, they drop the price. And it's done through an algorithm. That is how you price. But I will tell you, hardly anyone does it that way because
Right.
it's hard, right? It's a pain in the ass, right? And it's like, just, we'll just, we're smart. We'll figure it out, whatever.
100%.
And what I love, if you look at in 2007 when the iPhone came out, Steve Jobs did not do that, right? He didn't price it like everyone else's. Everyone else's phones were like $99 or whatever. The first phone was like $200, and the higher end one was like $500. Steve Ballmer, the head of Microsoft at the time, um, said, "This is terrible. Who's going to buy a phone that's $500? It doesn't even have a keyboard on it." And he's like totally dissing the whole thing.
Mhm.
Uh, and he was right, by the way. In the first year of the iPhone, they only had 4% market share. However, they had 50% of the profit share. So while they
Right.
were all doing these other things, Apple was making money,
And that's
right?
that's the trick.
Exactly.
You know, in my day job, I'm a lawyer, and lawyers are terrible at this. We all try to price relatively the same, et cetera, because you're afraid that somebody will say no and go to you. But then, I worked with a law firm where it's a small law firm, only a couple of attorneys, and they're just suffering because there's too much work, too many people coming in. Now they have to reject clients, but they're working all day, every day at that low rate. And I'm like, okay, so every single client, just up your price by $50 and until you
Yeah.
start hearing no. And at some point, yeah, because I mean, I bought into some of the stuff that I've heard where if you double your prices and half your clients drop off, you're making the same money and doing less work. How's that a bad
Right.
thing?
That's not a bad thing. Right.
Yeah, and you're probably not gonna lose half your clients. It's probably only gonna be like 25, 30% at most.
Yep.
Just coming from folks who have done it before, that's their experience. So you're actually ending up making more money doing less work.
Agreed. Yeah. And that's the best way to do it. Everybody's happier. Your what's really interesting about that is, so are you familiar with the Pareto principle?
It does ring a bell, but I'm not capable of,
You
articulating
know
it.
it more colloquially as the 80 rule.
Okay,
Well, there was this guy Pareto in, I can't remember, the 1600s, 1500s, and he did a study, and he found that the it was either the wealth or the land ownership of the area that he studied fell into this 80-20 rule. Is that 20% of the landowners owned 80% of the land.
right,
Now, what's interesting about that principle, and it is a principle, which is a term as lawyers, it's a specific term, right? Is when it's a principle, you can apply it to almost any situation, and it works. And you
correct.
can apply it to your friends. If you had 100 friends, my guess is you spend a lot more time with 20 of them than you do with the other 80. You have
Right,
clothes in your closet. You probably wear a certain amount of clothes, a lot more than you wear some of the other clothes. Songs you listen to, whatever. I mean, it applies to almost everything in your life, and it applies to business as well. And actually, and sometimes it's not 80-20, it's 90-10.
wow.
But let's just assume it's 80-20 because I know the math off the top of my head. So what happens is when you find that those 20% of the clients who provide 80% of your profit, and you understand who they are, and you can then go identify the next one, that next one is 16 times more valuable than if you didn't do that. So you
Right,
get one more client that is 16 times more valuable from a profit perspective than having to get 15 others. In terms of resource, et cetera, that's great. So spending the time to try to figure that out, like I would advise lawyers, I'd say, well, who are your best clients? Can you like put them in a bucket and they come back to you all the time and they're super happy and they probably would pay you more if you ask, but you're not asking them. They're referring people to you. If you ask for a reference,
mhm,
they'll do it, whatever, all those attributes. And then you sort of bucket them and say, okay, what are the similarities amongst these folks? You'll find that probably they have two or three or four things that are the same. And so what you do then is you then go look for that in the next client.
right,
And when you find that next client, you figure out a way to work with them, right?
yep,
Because they're going to be much more valuable than the other. But we don't take the time to do it. We'd rather spend the time just sort of getting new clients, et cetera. And we feel that feels good, right? Because it's rewarding, right? You get the client, you sign it, you do it, whatever. And this other work I'm telling you to do is like, well, I'm not getting any clients. I have to down and think. I have to do all this work. I have to then interview people and figure that out. And so we just don't do it. And I would argue that if you look over maybe 10 years, the amount of time that you spent with bad clients is way more than the time you would have spent had you done it up front to then identify great clients. But
correct.
again, that's our brain working against us.
Yeah, there's one of the other principles I've come across in the last, 12 months or so of digging into leadership and business building, etcetera, is sort of the concept that you're gonna pay for inexperience, either in fees paid to a coach or someone else to teach you, or in the time it takes you to figure it out on your own. Either way, that money is not gonna be yours. And once you kind of wrap your head around that, it's just a decision of, okay, so how fast do I wanna get through to the other side?
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I named my company Catalyst, right?
Mm,
Everything I teach my clients, you could do on your own. You just probably can't do it as fast.
exactly.
I can accelerate your steps because I've been studying this for a long time and I'm really good at this. I'm not really good at your business, but I'm really good at how to make great businesses. And if you want to, if I do a really good job and you follow the things that I teach you, and by the way, Cameron, I'm not teaching you Bill stuff. I'm teaching you 100 years of management science. I'm teaching you Drucker and Deming and Shine and McGregor and Bennis and Edmondson and Porter and all these people.
Uh-huh.
So you don't have to. I've already done all that and I've turned them into really simple exercises that you can do as a team to then leverage that in your business. There's no way you can do it as fast as I could do it with you, right? It would take you 10 times as long. So I should be free, right? If you do it, because then if you do it well, then you'll grow your business and my fees will just be a wash
Negligible. Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's a huge hurdle to come over with. Lawyers are very much like this. When you're a solo lawyer, you're just like, I'm not paying anybody for anything, and I just need to get clients. I don't care who they are, what they do, and that kind of mentality is pervasive. Most of the attorneys who are out there trying to run their own shop are suffering from that. I'm a longtime corporate guy, so I spent time in corporations, like kind of seeing how they implement stuff, learning from the likes of like John Maxwell and all these other folks from the seminars that the corporates would put on. And so now starting my own law firm, the guiding principle is, why would I waste all of my time trying to figure everything out when there are people who already know it? I literally spent 5 hours trying to build an AI intake agent to put on my website. And then
Yeah,
I typed in AI intake agent for lawyers, and I found one that's going to cost $80 a month that someone else already built and doesn't have bugs, and they handle it, and I don't have to host it. And I'm like, okay, cool, done. Why did I even try? Somebody else already did the work. Just take their work.
exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's sort of how do you value your time? And sole proprietors don't understand how to value their time. And they don't
Yep.
understand in all sorts of ways. They'll take any client that has money, even though clients are not the same. And I'm sure you've seen this, right? That not
Uh-huh.
all clients are the same. Even if they change it, if it's the same dollar per hour or whatever you charge them, some take a lot more work and a lot more effort. And it's not necessarily
Absolutely.
the exact same case. You handle that, but the client then some are much more needy and whatever, and some are just a lot more laid back and easy to work with and whatever. You want to find those that will pay you your fee, be happy to pay it, and you can hear their smile on the phone, right? Or you can see their whatever. And when you have those things, then you're in a much better business. And I would say this to always all people. It's harder with practitioners like lawyers and doctors and myself. Where I'm sort of the same kind of model. You have to really understand that if you get really, really good at something that someone values, then all of this stuff we're talking about goes away because people will come to you. You'll be the lawyer who is great at this thing and you'll get a reputation eventually, et cetera. And you won't have to do any marketing. I mean, Apple, on a percentage basis, they spend a lot of money on marketing, but on a percentage of business basis, they spend less than most companies
Yeah.
because they don't need to, right? They have created a reputation that people just know them. If you can do that for your own business and it has to be something, that people get, then your business will actually flourish. It'll take a while, right? And you may have to take some clients on to get payroll or whatever, but if you're always moving towards we want to be known for this,
Uh-huh.
right? And we're great at this. We're better than anyone else around us at this. Then they will just start coming to you and then you just deliver it and you also optimize the process to deliver it. So it will be less costly to deliver that thing because you will have made it easier for yourself, yet still pleasing to the client.
Okay. So, in the context of like service provider companies like a law firm or doctors, or even what you do, these coaching businesses, there's like we talked about with the solos or the small scales, the fear of losing business while you try to create your bigger, better offer. Okay. So, how does someone change functionally? How should we be framing the decision to change the mindset so that we can actually start focusing on the bigger offer rather than suffering with the small offer interminably?
Yeah. So it's a term that is typically used in law, which is you have to do it deliberately. And I say, look, it's a process, right? You can't just decide this is the way it is, and we're only going to get these clients. You still have to pay your mortgage and whatever. Right? But if you know you're doing that and you're deliberately doing it, but you're moving towards this thing that you have to have proven at least through experiment that it works, right? That you've had these conversations, you've done what's called discovery. You have interrogated prospects that you believe are the best ones. And I use interrogate in terms of sort of the, you see in cop shows and whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
That's not really interrogating. Interrogating is when you can pull information out of a person that they don't even know that they have. You understand how to leverage uh, the ability for the brain to recall things without like if I say to you, "Hey, what did you do last Tuesday?" And you're like, I don't really remember, and I'll say, "Well, what was the day like? Was it sunny or raining or whatever? Who are you with? What kinds of other things did you do on the day? Because me asking those questions, it'll start to have your brain start to make connections that it wasn't making when I asked the first question. And
Yeah.
you'll be like, oh, I remember now, because our brain is very associative. Right? The more information we can tie to one thing, the more likely we're able to recall it. That's what
Yeah.
great interrogators do. And
Okay.
if you're a great interrogator as a business person, you're able to understand why people buy things, and what job they're hiring the thing to do for them, as opposed to what they say, because
Okay,
what they say
so
isn't always true.
yeah, that's like stated preference versus revealed preference type stuff.
Exactly, right. And my question for that is, okay, what kind of movies do you like to go to? Right? People will. So there's a social fabric part of that, right? Which is they want to be perceived a certain way. So they say, oh, the piano and Schindler's List and, 12 Years a Slave and whatever, right? And, because they want
Right.
to be perceived a certain way. But if I say, how about in the last 3 or 4 months, what movies did you go to? Oh, we went to The Conjuring, the Avengers
Yeah,
movie. And right.
totally
So
different.
what they value is that, but what they say is the other, right? And you're trying to get what
Mhm.
they value because people will pay for what they value, but they hardly ever tell you what they actually value. They tell you what they think the social and emotional aspects of what they say will affect you and themselves because they want to be see themselves a certain way and they want you to see they want they want to be seen by you in a certain way as well. An interrogator understands that and doesn't ask, you know, hey, what should we build for you that you would be happy with? And then they'll
Do you
they'll tell you, and then you build all this stuff, and then they're like, "Oh, we're gonna charge more." Well, I'm gonna go with another provider, because
yeah.
they didn't value it. They wanted it, but they didn't value it. So, again, we don't take the time to do that stuff upfront and then on an ongoing basis because, tastes change and technology changes and all that kind of stuff. We don't take the time to do that because it doesn't seem like it's worth it at the time, but our future self is pissed off at our present self because they're like, "If you had just taken the 3 days to do that work, we would be in a different place now."
I am
So,
having a very small epiphany right now.
yeah. Okay, good.
About a week and a half ago, I changed my favorite candy bar from Snickers to Kit Kat. And the reason I did that is because I was telling my wife that my favorite candy bar is Snickers, and she's like, "Then how come you don't buy Snickers?" Whenever I'm in the line at the grocery store and I look over at the candy bar aisle, I walk away with a Kit Kat almost every single time if I'm gonna buy something. And I was like, "Damn, you're right. Okay, so this is like maybe world changing. So no longer am I is Snickers my favorite candy?" And then I started reflecting as you were just describing that section. I don't look at the Snickers in the grocery store aisle anymore. I used to always look at it and then go, and then go get the Kit Kat. Now I just look at the Kit Kat, grab the Kit Kat, and go.
Right,
And
right,
that's very much that's like the epiphany is like now I kind of know what it feels like to make that decision to change your whole damn process, go for a different type of customer because you realize that's the valuable customer
right. Yeah.
with
Well, so
candy
here's
bars.
interesting, but I would love to and there's 2 things that I wanna say on this because it actually brings up a really good example, but I would love to understand is there had to have been some sort of thing in your brain that says, "I wanna be seen as someone who buys Snickers."
Yeah.
Right? Either I wanna see myself as that or you wanna show someone other people that, right? So that's that sort of social and
Yeah.
emotional. There's a gentleman, his name is Bob Mesta, and he actually works with Snickers. And he did this study. So he's known for something called Jobs to be Done, which is a way to do customer discovery and figure out why people buy things, right? What causes them to buy a certain thing. And what he found out when he actually went to those customers who were the best Snickers customers, who bought Snickers all the time, and he talked to them and interrogated them, he found out that they do not perceive Snickers the same as Kit Kat.
Okay.
Kit Kat is an indulgence. Milky Way is an indulgence. It's the same as a cupcake or a muffin or whatever. Snickers, in their minds, is a food substitute. It is what I eat because it fills me up. It's instead of having, a banana or whatever, I have a Snickers. And you see the commercials, right? The Betty White commercials, and then she turns into a football player, and
Right.
you know, and those commercials were from this guy, right? He said you need to advertise differently because the people who buy Snickers see Snickers this way, and you need to remind them that's why that they're buying them.
So the ads came after realizing
After
the ideal
satis-
customer, and it was used to target the ideal customer.
exactly, which is
Whoa.
satisfaction. That's the advertisement.
Okay. I wonder. I don't know if that's what was going on in my heart, but
Yeah, I don't know either,
I
right? I'm
could
just saying
definitely say that I treat candy bars more as an indulgence these days. In my middle to late 30s, I'm focusing on healthy eating finally for the first time, and there's not as much candy bar. So candy bar for me is an indulgence. It only happens when I'm in the checkout line, and not every time. Maybe sometimes every time, but that's interesting. I would have never thought about that.
Yeah, yeah. Mine is just to sort of lament together on candy. Mine is
Okay.
hot tamale. Mine is,
Oh,
I don't eat candy. I don't eat candy at all,
okay.
and I don't eat it very often because when I buy a box of hot tamales, I eat the entire box
In one
in
sitting.
15 minutes, right? And it's like
Yes.
600 calories, and it's like hundreds of grams of sugar and all this kind of stuff. Totally, my system is probably going crazy, and my insulin's pouring out and whatever. I don't do it very often, but they're so I can't stop eating them.
Yeah, this time of year sucks because everywhere you go, there's a little bowl of candy between
Yeah,
Halloween and Christmas, and I like bite-sized candies that you can just grab a handful and unwrap and eat and go. Man, I'm like a squirrel with that stuff.
yeah, yeah. You got to be
It's a
careful.
problem.
Anyway, so I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good story. Um, uh, I love those things. I describe myself as an etiologist,
Okay.
and an etiologist is someone who studies cause and effect. And because I like to study first principles.
All right.
Because if you can understand first principles, then basically it's I move towards first principles and then second, third, and fourth order consequence. If you can
Okay.
understand those things, you make better decisions. Most people do not understand what one a first principle is and ignore second, third, and fourth order consequence. But if
Right.
you can be disciplined enough to say, okay, what's causing that, right? I say all the time is your job as a leader isn't to solve problems. And it's funny, I interview all my leaders when I work with them. So I've interviewed probably, I don't know, 100, 150 of them over the last 10 years that I work with. And I say, what sort of gets your juices flowing? What do you love doing? And I would say 60 to 70% say solve problems. And then I sort of store that away. And then when I meet with them the first time, I just want you to know, I say, I read all these things, et cetera. And most of you love to solve problems. And I said, I'm going to disappoint you.
Oh no.
Your job is not to solve problems. And like, what do you mean? I said, your job is to avoid problems.
Ooh, interesting.
Don't solve them. Yes, if you have to solve them immediately, but don't just walk away. Then say, what caused that? What could have been the reasons that led up to that happening? I said, if you keep going back and saying, what's the problem that caused that problem? And you keep doing that, you'll get to the root. And once you solve the root, all those other problems go away. Because if you don't solve the root, you will be solving the same problem in
Hmm.
different forms over and over and over again, which is not a good use of your time. But it feels good to solve the
Right.
problem. I like to say that that's a mink hole. Do you know
Yeah.
what a mink hole is, Cameron?
No, I do not.
Mink hole is a rat hole that feels really good.
Okay. So kind of like mink being the fur
Yeah,
coat
you're in
fabric
there,
type
feels
thing.
good, but it's
Gotcha.
still a rat hole. It's just
All right.
messing with
That's
your head.
interesting. Okay. Oof, man, I could go on for days about rabbit holes I love going down. The
No,
title of
no
my
pun intended.
podcast is fully indicative of my entire personality and worldview. I started it, and the whole intention here is just because I can't stop asking questions. So a rabbit hole is my favorite place to live, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm gonna
Yep,
have to
yep.
get some mink lining in some of my rabbit holes.
There you go.
Um, all right. So when we are considering, I guess as a leader, if you're not solving problems, you're preventing problems. And we're talking about that in the context of your first principles with second, third, fourth order consequences. So the problems that are popping up could be the fourth order consequence. And there's no way for you to know that immediately without doing some investigation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we
Sure.
got to go down those mink holes to find whatever the first principle, the root cause is, and then figure out how to address that. Do you have tools or frameworks that help identify if you're on the first, second, third, or fourth order consequence?
Yeah, so I have processes that I can have you go through that then sort of walk you backwards, and they're very straightforward. And then I say there are certain things like the 5C, right? The 5C is moving towards a first principle model. Now, how good you are at it will probably change as you get better at it, and you analyze and rework what you do. You'll get better and better and better at the 5 C's, and you'll be solving and you'll be making fewer and fewer decisions. So for instance, one of the things I say is I'll say, and I would recommend you do this or your wife do this, is in a week or whatever time frame, write down every decision you make.
Huh.
Don't think about them. Just write them down. Right. I made the decision. We decided to go with this client. We decided to go with this defense or whatever. Just write it down. And then at the end of the week, look at it and say, which of these decisions did I absolutely have to make? No one else in the business could have made this decision. And
Uh-huh.
if you have 100 of them, my guess is there'll be like 3. Now your job is to figure out, how do I not make those other decisions? How do I either teach someone else to do it, stop doing it? I have another exercise where I do it's there's 2 aspects to it, but the main one is love and loathe, right? If you go through the day, similar thing. When you walk through the day, have your love and loathe list, and those things that you love doing give you energy. You can't wait to do it again, etc. Write it down on the
Yeah.
love list. Loathe is the exact opposite. You're doing it for 5 minutes, it feels like an hour. You just put
Yes.
it off and whatever. Write that list. Now, my guess is the list of the loathe is way longer than the list of the love.
Undoubtedly.
Now take your loathe list and do 4 things. One is, what on here can I automate, like you just said in your example earlier? What can I delegate?
Okay.
What can I eliminate? And
Ooh.
what can I procrastinate on? So if I
Oh,
just
I like
didn't
the
do it,
last 2.
yeah, right? If you procrastinate and nothing happens, then eliminate it. But if it does happen, then either you have to decide, okay, I have to do it, or I have to delegate it or automate it. And your job is to shrink the loathe list. So then you have a lot more time to focus on the stuff you love, which you're probably great at or getting to be great at, and make a difference to the company. So that's another framework, if you want to call it that. So things like that is what I teach my clients. Here are ways you can do it. Now, when I get to the root, what I do is I have what I call a strategy decision matrix.
Okay.
And actually, I just had an HBR article which was in this, which was pretty cool, my first one ever. And inside that is I teach people at a high level what a strategy decision matrix is. It's basically, here are the parameters that we would use, that we want to, when we're making a decision, to understand, is it strategic or not? And there's typically 8 or 9 of them. And then we will put a percentage on those. And then we'll work through that. And then we'll say, what are the things that we want to decide, is it strategic? Is it almost strategic? Is it tactical? Whatever. And then we'll put scores on those things. And then we as a team will throw a decision through this matrix and see what comes out on the other side. And so you've already, instead of having to decide over and over again, is it strategic or not, you've already decided. You have
Huh.
created this process. All you're doing is then putting it through the filter, and out pops on the other side. Now you can then say, is that the optimal version of the matrix? Whatever, you can argue and change the matrix. But once you have it, it's a lot easier to make decisions or decide if they're strategic or not, because someone's going to have, a pet project they're going to try to convince you is strategic. But then when you put it through the thing, it's like, it doesn't make it, let's say it's on a score of 5, and everything that's is a 4 or greater is strategic, and everything less than 4 is not strategic. And this thing is a 2.5. And you're like, it's great, but we're not going to do that instead of doing these other 3 things that are, 4.5, whatever, or greater. And then they're like,
Okay.
and hopefully they'll be able to say, because they helped make the matrix, be like, all right, you're right. I was getting just emotionally attached to it and whatever,
Yeah.
and I want to do it, but I'll do it on the side or whatever. So it's things like that where you can actually just create the root up front, or at least the first version of the root, because it'll probably take iterations to optimize it. But then it just makes it a lot easier. If you have already decided ahead of time what's important, you don't have to decide what's important every time.
Why does that sound like something everybody should have intuited, but also extremely complicated at the same time?
I don't know.
It makes a lot of sense. I've long said that I am a voluntary obsessive compulsive because it makes life a little easier. So I put things in the same place. I do things the same way. Like, I'm so robotic and automated when it comes to my, law job. I don't remember in my head everything. I have a system of note taking and building up my little one sheet for everything. So if
Great.
somebody like an attorney on the other side calls me, the first thing I do is open the one sheet. Now I can talk in depth about anything and everything, But if I'm not at my desk and I don't open that one sheet, I'm gonna talk loosey goosey about everything. Like I might not remember any details at all. I may not even know which file you're calling about, even if I've only ever talked to you about that one file before and we've had 30 conversations in the last 2 weeks. I still may not remember.
Right. Because you've created a situation to tell your brain that while this is important, we don't need to take up brain space to remember it. We can just
Uh-huh.
go find it. And so
Uh,
your brain will store that differently than something that you have to remember because it's important, right? So
uh,
the best example is riding a bike, right? When you first learned how to ride a bike, it was hard. You fell down a lot. It was imbalanced. It was a fearful process. Now you can be on your phone and ride the bike. You can do it without hands, right? Because your brain has chunked together riding bike stuff and has stored that away so you don't have to remember everything, right? Do this, pedal this way, this hand goes here. If you had to remember every single step that you do to ride a bike, you'd never be able to do it. You have basically taken that and said, this is how I do this part of my process. It's done. It works great. I don't want to have to remember it. So unfortunately, when you don't have it, you're kind of at a loss because your brain doesn't have that information at the ready. My guess is if
yeah.
you sort of work at it, you'd be able to pull some of it back, but you're probably not in a situation where you can do that, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, you're using your brain well in that situation
Yeah.
because you don't those are not things you want. And my guess is you want to be creative and innovative and whatever in the process of talking to the person instead of having to remember the 10 steps.
My brain capacity is solely devoted to ruminating about anything and everything I can come up with.
Yeah, great. If that works
That's
for you.
my favorite pastime is just playing around with ideas and concepts. As a podcast fan who just listens to people like you talking all the time about all these cool ideas and practical things, I'll be listening to some other podcast and then suddenly the guest will say something and I'm like, "Whoa, we got to stop." Pause the podcast and now I got 30 minutes of just like brain dump writing into a notepad or a voice memo or something because it just triggered something. And I go on and on and on and on with that and then we'll go back and I'll re-engage with the podcast, but I've done my dump. I'm not carrying that in my head for the next however because there's no way it's making it to paper if I don't immediately dump it out. But then I will periodically go back through and using whatever if I'm thinking about something that touches that, I'll do a search term through my notes and pull up all the notes I've made about different podcasts and guests and try to, synthesize something that's worth synthesizing from that down the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So from a neuroscience perspective, do you know what do you have you studied why that works for you?
I wouldn't say I've studied, but I've heard people who have studied it talk about it on podcasts, and then I've taken notes about what they said, et cetera, et cetera. I know, like, practically speaking, from the user experience, it works for me because I just don't stop moving. I don't stop consuming information. I don't stop going. And I'm always thinking about like what I can do with this and what I can do with that and how I can play with this. So it's easier for me to build lists and systems of compiling the information so that when I'm ready to perform on any subject matter, I just go to that list and then I can make
Mhm.
my decisions. And it's almost like I've created in my own brain the leadership delegation thing that you were just talking about. My loathe list is just filled of knowing facts or like remembering specifics, and my love list is playing with them. So I've
Yeah.
delegated and otherwise, automated all of my, I don't know, fact building hardware components. And I guess it works for me because I'm never without the ability to goof off and have fun with stuff or to
Yep.
get things done. But I'm never one thing that got me from the very beginning of being a lawyer is so many people will say, "I don't remember," or "I think it's this, I think it's that." And I will do that if you and I are talking and I don't have my list. But then if I have my list, like there's no such thing as I don't remember.
Right.
It's there. And I wrote it down in my words and in my way of using it. And it's
Oh,
readily
that's
accessible 99.9% of the time. Maybe if we figure out a way to put our like hard drive onto an actual hard drive that's plugged in with this neural link, then I won't need my notes because I'll remember everything I thought of anyway. But for now, it's got to be an external hard drive.
yeah, exactly. Well, you do at least two things that I know of. One is you get new ideas because you have done all that collecting of information,
Right.
and as you said, it's in there somewhere, but it's called weak. They're weak signals.
Okay.
What happens when you get your epiphany? whatever size it is. It's basically it's called an insight process, right? And an insight is a term that happens from a neuroscience perspective, neurologically. An
Okay.
insight is when two parts of your brain suddenly fuse. They were not connected before. And then when you have that, like, I have an epiphany, that is
Uh-huh.
exactly what's happening at that moment. These two
Okay.
things that were not connected are now connected for whatever reason, but they have to be in there first.
Yeah.
If they're not in there, you never would have had that thought, right? So you have more and more thoughts, right? You're actually creating sort of a flywheel process, right? The more and more thoughts you have in your brain, the more and more likely you're going to have these insights, which I guess is good and bad, right? Because it can
It's
completely
like
throw you
building
down
a
rabbit
large
hole.
language model or
Yeah,
something like that. Like, the more information you have, the more you can do
yeah,
with it. And I've subscribed to that my entire life. Like, my great-grandfather, when I was in 7th grade or something, he was teaching me trigonometry on the hood of his truck, and he said something to me that I've internalized as, this was probably not his actual words, but he said, "If you don't know everything, how can you be reasonably certain you know anything?" And I
right,
was like, "Oh, shit." So that basically means that at any point in time, with everything that I know, I might be entirely wrong. And the next thing I
yes,
learn is what teaches me that. That's a terrifying idea, but it also creates the fun of being able to like really delve my entire life into figuring out new and cool things.
right,
And when you couple that with, how many people have you heard say, well, if I had only known something goes
right.
wrong in their life or something goes wrong with a decision they made. And they say, well, if I had known that, yeah, but you had the opportunity to ask that question.
You did at the beginning, right? And again, your brain
Yeah.
worked against you. I say this to people all the time. It's not really your fault, and your brain is not yours,
Interesting.
right? So your
Okay.
brain is your ancestor's brain. You can rewire it, but it's in a silent dungeon, right? And its entire job is to keep the plumbing and the scaffolding alive.
Okay.
That's what it is designed to do. That's why it doesn't really understand the difference between a social threat and a physical threat. The
Huh.
same parts of your brain light up when you're going to give a speech and you're scared than if you're in a situation where someone pulls a gun on you. The same parts of your brain light up. It
Huh.
doesn't, remember, it's in there, it's in the dark. It's relying on internal and external signals. It's called interoceptive and exteroceptive signals to make decisions, right? It's getting information from your heart and your lungs and your gut and your eyes and your ears and etc. to make decisions. And it's a predictive engine. So it's going to try to recognize the situation and then go through its files quickly and say, oh, I know what to do. We do this. Because every time it happened before like this, we did this. Again, whether it worked out or not, as long as you're still alive, that's your brain. Our brains haven't had a major upgrade for somewhere between 10 and 50,000 years, as far as I can tell.
Right.
It still thinks it's on the savannah with the 150 people in the tribe, just trying to survive on a regular basis. It doesn't know we're in this world that we're in, that we're driving cars and going to space and all that stuff, right? It's not wired to do that, which is why it works against us all the time. And I give a really simple example, right? So it was a full moon the other day here. I'm sure it was there as well. And did you see it on the horizon?
Oh, I love watching it on the horizon. It's
Right.
so much
Why?
nicer
Why?
because it's big and usually some
It's
sort of
big,
orange or
right,
yellow
it's big,
color.
right. So you're a smart guy, you know that the moon is a satellite and it
Yeah.
it doesn't move and
No.
it's 240,000 miles away. It's never not 240,000 miles away.
Right.
Why would it be huge on the horizon and not when it's way up in the sky? It's the same thing, the same distance away. Your brain is fooling you because
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, what I need to know," because I have stereoscopic vision, and again, it's saying, "Oh, when I need to see distance or I need to jump from tree to tree or whatever, depending on how old the part is that's using it, it has the bigger stuff is closer, right? That's what it says. So when the moon is against the skyline or the horizon, which you can see, which is closer, it now says, oh, that thing must be closer. Let me make it bigger.
Is that why our cameras can't capture it at that size?
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, because you do it like, oh, I can't wait to do this. And you look at it like, what the hell just happened? But then you look at your camera like, there must be something wrong with my camera. No, it's because it's your
Oh
brain
boy,
is completely fooling you.
that's
And it does that
interesting.
so many ways. And it's outside of our conscious awareness. Yet we argue like it's true, but our brain has fooled us in so many ways. So, that's basically what I teach my clients is that if you don't know a little bit about neuroscience, you're always at a deficit because we as human beings are crazy. I mean, we're just
Yeah.
basically nuts, right? Our default is irrational, emotional, and impulsive. That is a feature, not a bug, because those of us who were like you, 100,000 years ago would say, "Oh, those trees just rustled, and boy, there's a really nice, cool orange and black back. Let me go check that out." You died. The ones who heard the rustle and ran away really fast lived, right? That's the
Mm,
brain. We have a brain of people who were scared and ran away.
interesting. Interesting.
Now, maybe in another 100,000 years or 200,000 years, that brain will be able to do the things that we're asking it to do now, and it'll do it naturally. But right now, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about just the fact that our hardware and software, it hasn't changed. I keep thinking lately, if you think back to like ancient Greece and Rome and all of that, like Socrates, we kind of think about them living in these like dirty, dusty hut environments, etc. And then even in like, Rome, they built concrete houses, etc. They had aqueducts. By all accounts, they had some really cool architecture. We kind of still view them because it was thousands of years ago as being like primitive a little bit, but they weren't. It was the exact same people as we are now. They were capable of conversating and thinking and doing the same things we do now. They effectively set up the same social systems and social like hierarchies and markets and this, that, and the other. And you can imagine kids running through the streets the same way that they do in the cul-de-sac here in suburban America.
Yep.
And it's functionally like the exact brain and life experience, the way things are being perceived, and everything is identical to what we're doing now. We've got a few layers of complexity that we've added over time because, standing on the shoulders of giants, etc. But all in all, the people from ancient times who didn't have all the cool new knowledge we have still had the exact same hardware and software. And it's
Yep.
almost like, if you have a computer, a brand new MacBook, but you don't install the Microsoft suite. So it has no capability of processing words because it doesn't have the cool new trick that it's learned, but the hardware could do it. So if you took
Could
some
do it.
of the
Exactly. Yep.
cool information we know now, all the philosophy that's happened since Socrates, take it back and give it to him, see what that dude could do with it.
Right. And so the only thing that I've found out that is different is science, right? Is so if you look at from the beginning of man, right, Homo sapiens, if you look back 10,000 years, the average half of the people who lived to the age of 30.
Right.
Now, if you move forward in time, all the way up to the mid 1800s, half of the people who lived in up to 1800s was lived to 35.
Yeah.
So in 10,000 years, we added 5 years to half. Now, from the 1800s forward, the average life now the average lifespan of a man and a woman is in their 70s, right? Half of the people die um, at 70
Yeah.
or even older. So we have doubled our average lifespan for half of the population because of science. We have taken that part of our brain, which is the front, and used it to our benefit. Yes. Did we always have it? Yes. But then we now took a process and applied it and made our lives better. So that's
Uh-huh.
what I'm saying is you can just default to your old brain and make decisions like that. Or you can say, no, 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 I have the capability to do this. Let me slow my brain down and make a
Uh,
different decision, right? That's what Kennedy said. I'm not making a decision like this anymore. I'm making it like this. I'm using all of the assets and the capabilities I have at my disposal, or at least the ones I'm aware of, and using them to the best effect. And he made a better decision,
that's
right?
solid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, great example. Decision making can be one of the hardest things that anyone does, especially when it's an important decision. And figuring out, like you're saying, how to slow your brain down, really measure out what needs to be done. Your context and clarity points in the 5 C's is, I think you even said it. Nobody's doing that in almost any decision, even the tough, complex ones, or the ones that have the biggest impacts on your life. let's advocate for that.
I have my decision framework, and every now and again, I don't use it either, right? Because
That's true. I
it's like,
mean,
and by the way, sometimes it's fine, right? If you have wisdom, then you can intuit a decision and probably be right 80, 90% of the time. But what
well, you're
happens is we apply that engine to where we don't have wisdom.
correct.
That's when we get in trouble.
Well, that's hubris and other versions of thinking you're bigger than you are. But
But it
intuition is
feels right. That's the problem. It feels correct. I'm just, you
okay.
know, because I intuited this and this was right, I'm now I'm intuiting A where I have wisdom,
Yeah.
but I'm intuiting B where I don't have wisdom. It's the exact same feeling. So, but we're like, well, why didn't B work out where A did? It's because we don't realize that we didn't really know anything about how boats work or how a
Mm,
toilet works,
gotcha.
right? We think we know how a toilet works, right? This is a great example when people say, you know, how confident are you that you know how your toilet works? And people say, oh, 70, 80% confident. Great. Could you just sketch out how that works for me? And most of them can't do it
Oh
because it's,
boy, absolutely. I mean, that's there was a Big Bang Theory episode where all the guys are in a car that breaks down and they say, "Does anyone know how a combustion engine works?" And everyone says, "Yes." Does anyone know how to fix it? And they all say, "No." So you're right. And that's an argument for accumulation of knowledge, which is sort of my whole shtick. There's no reason not to ask questions about things you don't know the answer to. If you have enough information, you're probably never going to make a bad decision. Doesn't mean
yeah.
it's like wrong or, not the best decision or anything like that because you can play with nuance all you want, but you're probably not going to make a bad decision that totally blows up in your face. You're going to avoid saying, "Well, if I had only known." The more information you have, the less likely it is for you to be missing a piece of the
So
puzzle.
maybe I'm going to
Maybe.
say, well,
Okay.
here's the problem, right? Is that so the way we have the hippocampus, which is the thing that takes the information in and then decides what to do with it. And most of the time it says, get rid of it,
Okay.
right? It's like, put it somewhere. You're like, we don't need to remember this. It's not that important. But those things that are important to the hippocampus, it stores in long-term memory.
Okay.
And the reason it knows it's important is because it sees it over and over and over again.
Uh,
Bill's getting up every morning and brushing his teeth, right? And so let's store how to brush teeth in long-term memory or something like that, right? I'm using a really simple example.
yeah.
But, when I get up and I do it once a year, it's not storing it in a place where I can easily recall it. This is why first
Oh.
principles works, right? Is when you understand how things work at a first principle level, you don't have to remember all the details. You can just say, I understand how gravity works. I understand how suction works. I understand how mechanics work. So I have a general concept of how a toilet works, right? Because gravity's pulling the water down. I've got this sort of suction thing where it's moving water from one place to another where it wouldn't be, but because there's a force pulling it, and I understand mechanics. When I push this thing down, it's lifting that thing up, right? Now I don't have to remember
Right.
all the details of how all of those things work, how the one, this chain is attached to here, the force of gravity, or whatever.
Hmm.
I don't have to remember all that stuff, but I understand the principles, and then you can then say, so if that's true, how would I do it in this case? So you don't have to remember the details because very often you're not going to remember the details.
And that's why relying on intuition in your area of expertise tricks you into believing you can use your intuition in other areas, and
Yes.
that blows up in your okay. So you get too confident in the arena you love playing in. Okay, I get that. I mean, I'm still an advocate for accumulation of
Oh,
information
I'm not saying you
for no
shouldn't. I'm
reason,
just
but
saying, like, if you were in a
okay.
situation where, let's say, you learned how a car works, etc., and then 10 years later your car breaks down, I'm going to challenge that you don't know how to fix your car. You're just not going to remember how to do it all, right? But you may remember a little bit about how it works, and you could potentially try stuff because you know enough about the basics, right? The
Yeah,
foundation of it to say, okay, it's either an ignition problem, it's a transmission problem, or it's a gear
yeah,
problem. Let me go
okay.
look at those things and see if there's
Gotcha.
something like, oh, well, that wire is not attached or whatever.
And
And then
that's
you might say,
basically the first principle. The first principle
exactly
being how does it work, and then you see an issue, and then you have to investigate for second, third, fourth order. Okay, I got
right.
you. I
So
got
first
you.
principles are a lot easier to remember,
Got
and
you.
especially because you can apply them across lots of stuff versus having to remember individual details of every single thing.
Hmm.
Right? This is why physics is a wonderful scientific process, right? Is it because physics is first principle thinking,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I
Right.
study neuroscience because neuroscience is first principles, right? Our brain is what keeps us alive. It is a first principle. It is doing things. If you understand how it does things, you'll be able to understand how to use it better than just assuming that it does stuff or it does
Hmm.
certain things a certain way because your brain will then convince you of things that aren't true because it feels like it is true. This is so, and example was so in the I don't know what your background is, whatever, but in COVID, there was a set of people who said that because freedom was more important to them than anything.
Yeah.
And when you tell someone who feels freedom is important, tell them to do stuff, they're going to come up with reasons to not do it, even if it's against their own best interest. So they would come up with the reasons you put on a mask. It's like, well, we don't want to put on a mask because the carbon dioxide that you create when you have a mask is actually going to it's going to affect your health and all this other stuff. And then, of
Yeah.
course, but doctors and nurses wear masks all day and they seem to be okay.
Right.
But they don't think that argument because freedom is driving them. They're going to come up with every reason to support, I'm not wearing a mask, right? And
I
anything they can
see.
come up with, whether it's true or not. So that's where like understanding first principles is no, you can cover your mouth all day with your hand. You're not going to pass out because you covered whatever. Because by the way, you have a nose and stuff's going to sneak out. It's not sealed to your face. And there's all sorts
Yeah.
of things you think about. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking freedom. Freedom is more important than fact in that case.
Yeah.
And we do that
There's
all the time. It's an extreme example, but we do that all the time as humans.
That's true. That's true. That's definitely that of s- taking where you want to end up and working backwards to find whatever
Yes.
support was the exact opposite of starting from first principles. And if you were in a position where you are starting with the outcome and trying to work backwards for the justification, I mean, obviously, the context of what we were just talking about that can go wrong. But is there a way to still kind of I guess it goes back to your context and clarity, right? So for someone like that you were just describing, their context and clarity has to do with that freedom. The context being the freedom and the clarity being the measured output is not having to wear the mask, right? So then you can create your choices and go through the rest of the scene. I guess that makes sense because in your framework you are even though you're using first principles, you're starting with the end goal in mind. So
Yes.
hmm, maybe
So
we can't fault them too
I'm a
much.
big fan of outcome, but I'm not a big fan of just because I thought it's true,
Right.
right? Now you have to say, what is my ideal outcome? And then you have to say, okay, how do I know that's true? What would have to be true for that to be true? You have to challenge it and make sure that you're like it's doable and it makes sense. And you can, the scientific method is not come up with a hypothesis and then prove it's right. The
Yeah.
scientific method is come up with a hypothesis and try to prove it's wrong. And if you can't prove it's wrong, then you're onto something. But what's interesting
Mm,
is people do it the opposite. They say, "Oh, this is true, and now I'm just going to prove it's right." Which, by the way, you will. You will ignore all the reasons it's not true, and you will have all the reasons it is true. Now, I was talking with a guy years ago who is definitely a climate change. He doesn't believe in climate change, whatever. And I said, "Well, interesting. I think the planet's getting warmer, and it seems like the temperature keeps going up every year on average, etc. So, how you want to describe that and what words you want to use. It seems like we're getting warmer. People call it climate change." And he said, "Well, the seas have actually receded, et cetera." And I said, "Well, that's interesting." And I said, "So where are you getting your facts from that?" And he's like, "Well, if you go look at the data," he doesn't have any. So I said, "Great." So I looked at NOAA and some other thing. And for 2 years in the last 40, he is correct. But
and
he
not
cherry,
consecutive years or recent.
right. It was like 20 years ago, the seas actually receded for whatever reason. We don't know why, whatever. But people who took the data said this, and he decided that that was the only information he wanted to use because, again, he wanted to believe something. He didn't want to challenge his belief. He wanted information that supported his belief, and he ignored everything else.
Hmm.
Right. And this was a man. I knew I was never going to convince otherwise. So I said, oh, that's interesting. I just think about it differently. And here's why I think about it differently. And we'll have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
'Cause I knew I was never going to convince him that he was wrong.
Okay. Yeah. So the 5 C's can get you in danger sometimes, but overall, we're talking it's a good tool. I'm a big, we've talked about it enough. We're big fans, you and I, of sort of systems and methods for getting stuff done. I see the value in this one because most people rush into a decision with I thinks and I feels. And how does that actually get you anywhere?
Yeah. And by the way, I'm a big
Interesting.
fan of I feel, right? A gut is a wonderful thing, right?
Okay.
But there's a phrase called a gut check. Just check it, right?
Uh,
Especially if it's really important, right? If it's something that doesn't matter that much, then whatever. Just but be prepared to be wrong, right? Just know that you might be wrong. Now that I know all this stuff, even though I know all these things about my brain, I still get fooled by it because most of it is outside of my conscious awareness. But I've become much more compassionate as a human being to myself and to others, knowing that this really big, important piece of your existence is working against you all the time. And you don't know it. So at least I know it and I can say, I get it, right? And I understand why you think that way. I don't have to agree with what you're thinking, but I understand why that's happening. And it's not really you doing it to you. It's 100,000 years of this formation of this thing that's inside that's helping you to make these decisions on a regular basis. And that's why I don't argue with the guy. I'm like, okay, I get it. There's something about him that's really important, and um, I'm never going to convince anyone of anything that they think is absolutely true. And I know that in most cases, most things are never absolutely true, and there's a shelf life of facts. And even the stuff I say now may be proven wrong in 30 or 40 years, right? But
yeah.
as of right now, we believe this is true. So let's go with what we got.
Fair enough. I think that's a fairly positive note to end on. It's a great conversation. Really enjoyed your insights. Go ahead and tell us where we can find you, your books, and I assume you have a coaching offering of some sort, correct?
Yeah, everything is on my website. It's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com. My book is on there, which is called Further Faster. I've
Okay.
written, as I said, I've written a number of other books. They aren't published yet. I'm hoping, looking to find a publisher right now. But hopefully I'll get that. And then over the next probably 6 to 10 years, those other books will come out, which is a lot of what we're talking about here, but
Hmm.
applied to business. And yeah, my coach offering is on there. My contact info is on there. And so that's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time with me today. I look forward to seeing how your catalyst for your future takes hold in the future.
Me too.
All right, bud.